Do you have a list of things that you said as a kid that you wish you could take back? Because I have a long list. I know, shocker to all of you. Well, my parents threw me a birthday party, and one in particular that they threw that I wanted to talk about. A bunch of friends got to come over and spend the night, and so we're unwrapping all of those presents that they brought me. I was still at that age where that was a thing, and you're excited about the presents that people are giving you. And I got all the presents unwrapped when my best friend looks at me and he says, hey, Brian, which do you think is the best gift here? And then he points and says, I think it's that one. And so I take a moment to consider thoughtfully, and then I share, I think it's that one too. And much to the chagrin of my mom and dad, hi Mom, you probably remember this. And my mom says, Brian, we don't talk that way in front of our guests at a birthday party or any time. And I felt so dumb, and I kind of realized, what are my friends thinking? Are they just all thinking like, well, I'm just going to take back my gift since it's not the best gift, Brian? I mean, well, all of them were probably thinking that except for my best friend who pointed at the gift that he gave me. So I felt so incredibly dumb that my greedy eyes, which, by the way, at the time were just still way too old to think out loud, this is the best gift, and rank them, I lost sight of the fact that I had friends who came to my birthday party, that I mattered. They accepted the invitation, and they showed up. I felt like a somebody. We're in the middle of a message series called Nobody, Everybody, Somebody. And there are folks who are somebodies because they're famous, they're powerful, they're rich, they're pretty, etc. And then there are a lot of nobodies in the world, people who the world just doesn't seem to see. But the truth is that God doesn't see anybody as a nobody. God sees us as somebody. And if we choose to invite Jesus to take over that center spot in our lives, then he calls us to see other people as somebodies as well. And we keep coming back to this idea in the series that a somebody is one who helps a nobody realize that they are a somebody. It's a theme that you'll find on almost every page of Luke's gospel. And these stories that we've been looking at are from the Gospel of Luke, which was written by a guy named Luke. And he put together these stories, these teachings, and the life of Jesus for people. Luke was a doctor. He was a somebody in his day and time. And he wrote to Theophilus, this guy we don't know much about, but Theophilus must have been a somebody. Now, most of Luke's gospel is about how Jesus treated the nobodies. In fact, there are so many somebody, nobody stories in Luke, left and right. Today, we're going to look at one about a respectably religious leader, someone who was a somebody, and an unwanted, uninvited guest in his house, a prostitute, a person who was a nobody. Now, before we jump into that story, I want to tell you a story from one of my heroes. His name is Tony Campolo. I've got a picture of him and me. That's like 20 plus years old. What I do if I meet authors that I really like, if I can get a picture with them, and then I take that picture and I print it. I don't know if you remember printed pictures. And I'll tape it into one of my books that I have of theirs. So anyway, Tony was a professor emeritus of sociology at Eastern University in Pennsylvania. He's a teacher, a lecturer, a pastor, a Christian activist. He's just a dynamic follower of Jesus. He's been on TV in things like Nightline and Larry King and the Colbert Report. He is a somebody as a leader in our country, as a Christian leader. Now, he's outspoken about a lot of issues, and not a lot of Christ, I would say not a lot. There are some Christ followers that they do not like him. But one of his objectives is to rile people up and to get people to see from a different angle things they think about Jesus. I love this guy. If you want a quick, challenging read, he's got a couple books, Speaking My Mind, and then Red Letter Revolution, What If Jesus Really Meant What He Said? Now, he's got some amazing experiences just with going around the country and speaking and just life in general. And he tells this great story of how he was at a speaking engagement in Honolulu, Hawaii. Now, the jet lag did a number on him because he was living in Eastern Standard Time, and then he went to Honolulu time, which is Pacific? No, it's Honolulu time. So anyway, there's a big difference, right? And so he wakes up at 3:30 in the morning because his sleeping patterns are wrecked. His eating pattern is wrecked, and so he's hungry. And so he ventures out into downtown Honolulu, and he finds a greasy little spoon where he meets the cook who is running the diner. His name is Harry, a gruff guy. And he orders a coffee and a donut. Halfway through the donut eating experience, a group of 8, 9, 10 women come in from the street, and they are provocatively dressed. And they start talking about work and how they're just getting off of work. And Tony, he's a good church guy. He starts to connect the dots about why these women are coming in at 3:30 in the morning, just off of work, dressed really provocatively. And he realizes, great, one of the most noted Christian leaders in the country right now is in a diner at 3:30 in the morning with a bunch of prostitutes. With not too many exceptions in human history, people have seen prostitutes as nobodies. People involved in activities that society tends to think of as wrong or immoral puts them in this category as nobodies. And as Tony tells the story, he reminds us that the good church folks are not supposed to be hanging around with customers like in Harry's diner. And I get that. My wife would have a lot of questions for me if I was in this situation. So, it's this idea that good church people should be separated from people who are living bad lifestyles. And that's not anything new. In fact, that's where we pick up for our story in Luke that he has for us. Jesus is the guest of honor at a dinner party put on by a guy named Simon, and he is a Pharisee, Simon the Pharisee. Now, let me explain what Pharisees were back then if you don't know. Now, some of them did follow Jesus, but most of them were kind of opposed to what Jesus was trying to do with this movement, this message of love and forgiveness. Now, centuries before Jesus is on the scene, they started this movement, the Pharisee movement, and they had good intentions because when many Jewish people got back to their homeland after being in exile, what the Pharisees said is, hey, what if we will obey 100% of God's laws 100% of the time as a way to get God's favor, to earn God's love, and that way we won't get conquered again and taken off into exile as punishment. And so gradually a group of men decided to begin this movement that was dedicated to obeying all of these laws all the time. They took a fine-tooth comb through all the laws in the Hebrew scriptures to figure out how they can best help people apply those laws in their lives. And so by Jesus' time, there were about 6,000 of these Pharisees, experts in obeying the laws of God. And they were highly respected by the Jewish people. These were the very definition of somebodies back in their day. But it became harder and harder for the Pharisees to really relate to the average person in Israel. For one thing, they made it almost impossible to obey all of the laws fully. For example, the 10 Commandments have the command to obey the Sabbath and to keep it holy, and do no work on the Sabbath day. And so to help people take seriously that particular law, the Pharisees developed 39 categories of the type of work you could not do on the Sabbath. And each of the 39 categories had detailed lists with specific things that you could or could not do. For example, you could not thread a needle on the Sabbath. You couldn't just thread a needle, because if you thread a needle, boom, you broke the Sabbath. It's over. Another example was you could not carry more than a quart of liquid on the Sabbath, which that's bad news for gym rats that are in between sets are drinking from their gallon jugs, right? So most people couldn't even learn those lists, much less obey them. The Pharisees turned following God into a rules-based faith rather than a grace and forgiveness and love-based faith. And Jesus is not about a rules-based faith. He had a lot to say to the Pharisees, claiming that their good intentions were turning people away from God rather than drawing people to God. A rules-based faith like the Pharisees' faith asks, have I done enough for God to love me? It became easy for them to judge the rest of the people who were having a hard time applying those 613 extra rules to their lives. And to the people who probably just said, you know what, I'm going to pack it in because I just can't do it. And they would give up. It became like the Pharisees were giving this message that I obey the rules and you don't. Thus, I am better than you. Have you ever received that message from a church person before? Have you ever given that message as a church person? This kind of thought makes me go back to that birthday party where I had to have made my friends feel less than a somebody because I didn't say that their gift was the best present there. The very name of the Pharisees made it even worse. Pharisees actually means the separated ones. Their very name meant that they kept themselves and their rule keeping separate from average people. They even dressed differently than the average person back then to kind of even give another air or another level of separateness. They made it very clear to everyone that they were a somebody and they differentiated themselves from the nobodies. Jesus, by contrast, was born a nobody. He was raised by nobodies. He called nobodies to be in his inner circle, and he spent the bulk of his time with nobodies. People even asked, isn't this the carpenter's son? A nobody who began a popular movement as a teaching, traveling rabbi. Sometimes Jesus was invited to be the guest of honor at people's homes because he was so well known. And that's where the story begins in Luke chapter 7. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Now you're probably wondering a few things. First of all, they were reclining at the table? What's that like? I mean, as a kid, if I were to start reclining at the table, I tell you what, I'd get one swat to my feet to knock them off the table. Well, I did some research, and I found that a common dining area in well-to-do homes featured a table called a triclinium. Triclinium, say that 5 times fast, triclinium. So this is what it looked like. I got a picture, and this is actually not AI generated. This is a real live picture of from a restaurant somewhere in Italy where their big thing is, hey, come here and sit at one of our tricliniums and have this type of meal, okay? And so you could see how the woman could be wiping Jesus's feet with her hair from behind Jesus as he's reclining at the table. Here's another picture. I don't know. What do you think? Does that look relaxing to you? I mean, I think I'd rather lay back on my couch and take a gamble on how much popcorn's going to fall in between the couch cushions. And by the way, when it comes to my kids, the answer is a lot of popcorn gets between the couch. It's like they just eat it like this. So anyway, that might explain how they were probably eating and reclining at the table. But my next question is this. Did no one seem to mind or raise any concern that this woman seems to just barge in to Simon's house? I mean, no one seems to mind. No one pipes up to say, hey, does anyone else feel like it's weird that she just waltzed in and started doing what she's doing? Well, I found this out. What we might think of as a private home was largely unheard of back in Jesus' day. And so they frequently would leave doors open as they dined. And people would come in and go, beggars, other friends, people who were curious to listen to maybe some of the talk that was going on, or if a rabbi was at a meal, it was a way for them to learn and listen. And you see this in the other stories in the Gospels. It was pretty commonplace. Well, I bet you still have one more question. And that question is Jesus going to ask why this woman seems to be obsessed with his feet? I mean, he doesn't stop her. He doesn't do anything. Well, to answer that question, we got to read more of the story. Verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. I can bet Simon is probably thinking some other things as well, like, Jesus, she's a nobody. If you're going to be a somebody like me, you're going to have to learn how to separate yourselves from those nobodies. Have you ever felt like someone was thinking that about you as a nobody? Have you ever had that thought about someone else, that they're nobody? This story, it's starting to hit close to home, isn't it? The next line to come out of Jesus' mouth would have made me shudder, but I know Jesus as Savior and as King of Kings, and this guy Simon the Pharisee, he didn't have that information. He didn't understand that at the time. But check out how Jesus handles Simon's snobbery. Looking directly at Simon, this is how it plays out. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. And here's how I would have said it if I were Jesus. Duh, Simon. Which is why it's a good thing I'm not Jesus. So, Jesus sees this woman. He sees her for who she is, a child of God. Simon sees a nobody. Jesus sees a somebody. And this woman, she sees the one who matters the most. When did she hear of this message of love and forgiveness from Jesus? Was it just his reputation that came before him, and when she found out he was in town? Was it a conversation that they had that day? Was it an encounter somewhere where she just was blown away by God's love? Well, Luke doesn't answer that. But what it does seem to appear to be is that Simon thought she was a nobody. But you know what? She did not care one lick what Simon thought, or anyone else in that room for that matter. She knows what the best gift is at that party. It's that love and forgiveness that Christ offers. That's the best gift. It's Jesus. And here's where it gets real, everybody. Here is the aw snap moment for Simon. Looking directly at the woman, but talking to Simon, This is what Jesus says. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the moment I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little." Now, Simon might have made Jesus the guest of honor at this party, but he's insulting Jesus left and right. He didn't give Jesus the customary welcome for when a guest comes into your home, which is a kiss on the cheek. He didn't offer Jesus a bowl of water for Jesus to wash his feet after coming in from the dusty outside. He didn't offer Jesus scented oil to freshen up after a long day. Simon is putting Jesus into his place. He is saying, you are clearly not the somebody that everyone thinks you are. And when this woman enters, Simon thinks of her as a sinner. And he knew what she was like. He knew her reputation and what she had done, even though Luke doesn't tell us. What was she? Was she an alcoholic? Was she an adulteress? Was she a prostitute? Luke doesn't say. And it's not for us to say. Luke doesn't see the need to tell us. It's enough for us to know that this woman felt like she had a mountain of sin that Jesus forgave. In response to God's overflowing love and grace and forgiveness, she gives this demonstration of exuberant gratitude and thankfulness. This love has transformed her. Verse 48. Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Jesus sees her and tells her that she is a somebody in God's eyes. Jesus sees her. Jesus sees you as a somebody. Back to Tony Campolo's story in a dirty Honolulu diner. Tony wasn't at a dinner party of somebody's. He was in a greasy little diner downtown in Honolulu with a bunch of prostitutes talking into the wee hours of the morning. And Tony overhears one of them say, "Hey, tomorrow's my birthday." And her colleague next to her says, "So, what do you want, a birthday party?" And she says, "No, I'm saying that it's my birthday tomorrow." She pauses and considers for a moment, and then says, "No one's ever thrown me a birthday party." Well, over a little bit of time passes, and they leave, and it's just Tony and Harry the cook. And he says, "Hey, Harry, what's that woman who said it's her birthday tomorrow, what's her name?" "Agnes," Harry says. Tony says, "Hey, why don't we throw her a birthday party tomorrow morning?" And so Harry bakes the cake. Tony goes to Kmart for all the supplies, and they get the word out in Honolulu that they're going to have a birthday party for Agnes. And I'm going to let Tony tell the rest of the story.
Jane, who does the cooking, got the word out on the street so that by 3:15, every prostitute in Honolulu was squeezed into this place. I mean, people, it was wall-to-wall prostitutes and me. 3:30 in the morning, the door opens. In comes Agnes and her friends. I got everybody poised, everybody ready. The minute she walked through the door, we yell, "Happy birthday, Agnes!" and all start cheering like mad. I've never seen anybody so stunned in my life. Her knees buckled. They steadied her and got her and sat her down on a chair. And we started singing, "Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday, dear Agnes." And when they brought out the cake, she lost it and started to cry. Harry just stood there with the cake, and finally he said, "All right, Agnes, knock it off. Blow out the candles, Agnes. Come on, blow out the candles." She tried, and she couldn't, so he blew out the candles. and handed her the knife and said, "Now cut the cake. Come on now, cut the cake." She sat there for a long moment, and then she said to me, "Is it all right if I don't cut the cake?" She said, "What I'd really like to do is take the cake home and show it to my mother." I said, "It's your cake." She stood up. I said, "Do you have to do it now?" She said, "I live 2 doors down. Let me take the cake home. I'll bring it right back. I promise." She picked up the cake. She pushed through the crowd and out the door. And as the door swung slowly shut, dead silence. The whole group was stunned. I didn't know what to say. Finally, after a few uneasy moments, I said, "What do you say we pray?" It's weird looking back on it now. A sociologist leading a prayer meeting with a bunch of prostitutes at 3:30 in the morning in a diner in Honolulu was the right thing to do, and I prayed that God would deliver her from what dirty, filthy men had done to her, usually starting like at, when they're about 12 or 13, and then they're ruined and hurt. And when I finished praying that God would make her new, that God would give her back everything that had been taken from her, I said amen and lifted my eyes, and Harry was right in my face. He said, "Hey, Camp Paulo, you told me you were a sociologist. You're no sociologist. You're a preacher. What kind of church you belong to?" And one of those moments when you come up with just the right words, I said, "I belong to a church that throws birthday parties for whores at 3:30 in the morning." I thought that was a clever answer. I'll never forget his response. He looked back and he said, "No, you don't. No, you don't." He said, "I would join a church like that." Wouldn't we all?
Wouldn't we all? Tony saw Agnes as a somebody, as a child of God. He saw her through love and forgiveness and grace. Jesus saw the woman at the party as a somebody, through love and forgiveness and grace. And Jesus sees you as a somebody, through love, forgiveness, and grace, a child of God. Do you see that gift of love and forgiveness? It's for you. It's for all of us. What about for other people who we might think of as a sinner? Who is that for you? Is it a talking head on a politics show? Is it a trans person? Is it someone in your neighborhood? Friends, we're called to share this love, this gift of grace and forgiveness with everybody, to say they are a somebody, because Jesus sees you and me as a somebody. May you be more like Jesus. May you be like someone who throws parties at 3:30 in the morning for sinners.